All right, guys, welcome back. This is the end of the world with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I am Stu. And today we are discussing 2024 smash streaming hit Fallout, which was created by Graham Wagner and Geneva Robertson Dworet. Apologies if that was wrong. And features the directing talents of Jonathan Nolan, right? As the sort of he directs the first three episodes. Brother of Christopher, right?
Interesting.
And he's also the creator of Westworld, a show that we may talk about at some point in the future.
We certainly will talk about, and I enjoyed this a lot more than Westworld.
I thought the first season of Westworld was like really good, and then after that, I just like completely gave up on it like halfway through the second season, and then
I found a lot of it exhausting.
Yeah, I would sort of dip in to some of the later, like when Aaron Paul came on board, because I'm just like enormous. I'm an Aaron Paul fiend. I was like, it's like hook this up to my veins, Aaron Paul. But even Paul could not. And this was ironically during COVID, right? I was like in lockdown, rewatching like Star Trek for the 50th time, and then I was like, oh yeah, Aaron Paul Westworld. And even then, I like couldn't do it. Couldn't make the leap.
Right.
Couldn't make the leap of faith.
And this Fallout show is on Amazon, which I feel like
is interesting,
and doesn't have a huge run of streaming hits. Right?
No, I think like this is
originals.
This is the second biggest original hit for them. The first being, I think, the Lord of the Rings show, the divisive Lord of the Rings show.
But that tanked, right? Like people hated that show.
Well, Chuds hated it. I thought it was great. Me and all my friends loved it.
You loved it, huh?
I loved it.
Interesting. I've heard only negative things.
Yeah, but your friends are all cringe. Red-pilled monsters, as we know. I legitimately thought it was great. And I don't care about, the continuity doesn't agree with what Tolkien... Another one of my enemies, man. J.R.R. Tolkien. Look, don't get me wrong. I love the Lord of the Rings. They're great books. But, like recently it was going around on Twitter that Tolkien hates Shakespeare. And it's like, oh, okay. Like, I'm trying to think of what the equivalent of that would be. It's like
Mozart?
like Drake hates Mozart, maybe? Like,
right.
Something like that. So I've got Drake on the brain because of the recent escalating beef.
He's tough.
What's that?
He's being tough.
Yeah. It's the Kendrick Lamar Drake beef is simmering as there's probably a new diss track will come out while we're
right by the end of the recording.
Yeah, but in any case, so Fallout is I really liked it. We've been on a kind of negative vibe with a lot of the stuff we've been covering.
Certainly.
And I thought this was really fun. And I don't think it's like particularly deep or anything, but I thought it was very interesting because I think it's kind of wrestling with with the question of like what is reality, like what do we like, what are the stories we tell ourselves to like justify how we see the world. And I was just sort of thinking about that with like the people living in the vaults, like she tells the story, Lucy, the protagonist, at one point that like she thought the like big light in their vault was the sun, right?
Was the actual sun,
right? Yeah. And this has like these certain like Platonic, like Plato's cave, the ideal sort of overtones that I thought were interesting. I guess before we go any further, we should say that this conversation will be filled with spoilers for season 1 of Amazon's Fallout. And did you have any experience with the Fallout video games?
No, I never touched it.
Yeah, neither do I. I feel like this is...
Everyone knows. Everyone knows who's played it. It's like pretty into it, like pretty substantially brilliant stuff. But apparently the world building is pretty incredible.
Yeah, from my understanding, from what I've read in various reviews, the show doesn't like has the vibe of the video games and like the world, but doesn't. There's no
Right.
story that it has to like recapitulate.
Yeah, this is sort of how it distinguishes itself pretty clearly from The Last of Us, right? Where you're in the world or a part of the world or various pieces of various worlds of the video game franchise without actually following whatever the stories are, because there are a ton of Fallout games, right?
Yeah,
Whereas Last of Us at times, like we talked about, is almost shot for shot the video game at times. Um, and again, I think a lot of the reviews that I've seen basically say that it's actually the best so far in terms of an adaptation from a video game. In terms of it's leaning more on the sort of like medium of television than simply regurgitating whatever you're playing. You know?
right. And I think that's one of the advantages. Like another big video game show. Well, big. I don't know. Is the Halo show? Have you ever watched that? It's on one. It's
No,
on like I don't even remember. It's on Peacock or it's on Paramount Plus. It's on one of the lesser network streaming things. Funnily enough, my dad loves that show. He's like, "Oh, Halo, you got to watch it." I was like, "Oh, okay."
are they gonna? Are they gonna? They should adapt like Madden. Just
Yeah,
just
I
make
mean,
it uh, and just do like a career mode in Madden. Put it on TV. See what it looks like. You know?
yeah, yeah. I mean, why not? What I mean, Final Fantasy. They made that movie of Final Fantasy back
Yeah.
in the day. Like, there's a lot of sure, all of this is just in development. Like
Well,
this.
Pop Tart is in development. Seinfeld's
Well, it's
trying
not
to
just
create his
it's beyond
next masterpiece.
well, it's beyond development. It's in theaters, right? I mean, it's out.
Wait, is it out?
It's out. I've been seeing
Oh my
reviews.
god!
Apparently,
When I
it's
saw him, I sounded like he was just writing
when you
it.
and Jerry last sat down to
No, no, like
talk
when
shop.
I mean, I guess I just listened to a clip where he was talking about it, and it would said something stupid like, "My goal was to make it the opposite of Barbie." It's like, wow, we are in some dark, dark reality here, dark timeline.
Yeah, no. Apparently, the Pop Tart movie is soulless, gutless movie made by a scumbag.
Sure, what a shock.
Yeah, Jerry. Jerry's not doing so
But
well
yeah,
these
no, I
days.
mean, it's good. This is good because I mean, I don't think you definitely don't have to play Last of Us to get a feel and be compelled by it. And that's sort of the same thing here. I mean,
Yeah,
I was had no association with the video game, but like the genre, and I think this does a pretty good job of bringing you in right away in the beginning. If you want to talk about how like they set up the show,
yeah,
it feels a little all over the place, but purposefully. But yeah, why don't you just sort of explain
totally. Well,
the
like what I
where the
like
world we're in?
what I like about the show is that I think one of the things we've been sort of down on with a number of the things we've covered is self-seriousness, right? That
Yes.
there's like the Alex Garland being the most recent examples, right? But also I think with even Costner, it's like
Well, it's also something like self seriousness without following through and treating the ideas all that seriously.
well, that's right. Like
Yeah,
self-seriousness, but in name only, like
right.
not
That's correct.
actually meriting it. So there's two timelines that we see in the show, right? On the one hand, there's the 2077 uh, story that follows kind of declining actor Cooper Howard, who's played by Walton Goggins, and he is doing birthday parties because his star has fallen. We aren't explained why. Eventually, we learn that
And alimony. They tease the little right. The one guy's like he's doing it to pay for his alimony. Right.
right, right, and that isn't fully fleshed out like in this first season, but
Mm-hmm.
we get the outline of like
Yeah.
what the conflict with his spouse is about. Um, and that is basically showing us the first episode. We see the bomb falls, right? Like Los Angeles is nuked, and presumably the rest of America and the rest of I think it's a nuclear war with China in this case,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about resource scarcity, and these tensions have been mounting. And it's quite interesting because although it's set, 50 something years in the future, it is a very much a retro future, right? So everything has this kind of 1950s aesthetic that I think is very, well, it's very interesting. We'll talk more about that later.
Yeah.
Uh, then the other main, sort of the bigger main timeline is some 200 years after that, I think. And it's in this vault, Vault 33, where Lucy, who will be our protagonist, is getting ready to get married to a dweller from one of the other vaults because in order to maintain genetic diversity, they have to occasionally trade. This is sort of analogous to what Pacific Islanders used to do, right? Because if you live on an
Sure.
island, after a while, everyone. So eventually, you find an island that doesn't have quite so many of your cousins on it, and you trade a husband, trade a wife, that kind of thing. Um, and she's excited. Her vault is very orderly, right? There's like a council that runs things.
Yeah, and there's a bit of like a Pleasantville, maybe almost Truman Show vibe of like it's not quite like that obsequious, right? But everything is very pleasant and kind, and there's also like the weird undercurrent of the like casually accepted incest that goes on. It's all sort of
That's
light, and
that's
they
right. They,
right.
fooling around with your cousins is fine, but like for marriage, we have
It's just not a long term.
to.
Yeah, it's not a long term solution.
And that's what I mean. Like, I think that's why the show works well because we have this horrifying, cousin hookup culture that's just treated in this light and kind of it's like treated very well. You're like, oh, okay, yeah,
Right. To say nothing of like the world that they are scared of above them,
which
and yet they still kind of like buzz around in this happy way, sharing food and eating as a community,
and they have very
you know,
like ethical guidelines. Like everything is like
yeah,
the golden
and like
rule comes up a
common
lot.
manners, right, are like sort of held up as like a very important way to continue existing. Is to like it's sort of like act like you are in a 1950s period piece where everybody is treating each other kind and going out to the front of the driveway to pick up their mail and saying hi to Barb, like that type of
Yeah,
shit.
very much so. And what we're to understand is it feels almost as if there's been like society that we saw in the 2077 timeline has just kind of frozen, right? And they've kept
Yeah,
everything
they've gone
like,
downstairs, right? They made it into the vaults.
but they haven't like changed. They haven't evolved and adapted in the way that you might anticipate people would, given.
Right. It's almost as though, and I don't know how purposeful this is, but like the idea that the society seems to have is to retain, like to try to retain
Right.
the sensibilities and the aesthetic that existed when they went down into the ground.
And
Right.
So it's conservative with like a small c, right? They're just like trying to
Right.
conserve, like, and they have some kind of nuclear powered like existence. They have water filters.
Right.
They
They
have
can create food.
right. There's like a farm, and a sort of astroturf like farm, and
Right. But they're still American, right?
and they're very proud of being
any,
American. They talk
yeah,
about
and
that
they're
a
not doing
lot.
any particularly real of what got them here and what might need to change up top when they go back out.
Right, and it seems that
know?
they have basically no contact, as far as we can tell, with the outer world.
Right.
And they're connected to two other vaults, Vault 31 and Vault 32, and the everything seems fine until this like marriage that she's gonna engage in goes horribly wrong because, as we learn quickly, Vault 32 has in fact fallen. It has been infiltrated
Right.
by raiders from the outside. I forget precisely how this occurred, but the people that come over are under the command of this Moldaver, who will be sort of one of the. It's very interesting. Her father is Kyle MacLachlan, right? Who's Hank McLean.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the leader of their group. Moldaver is like posing as the leader of this other group, or maybe she was. The exact, it's not exactly clear, But basically, as she's like having sex with her new husband after this sort of very conservative, traditional 1950s style wedding ceremony.
Right. Up to the point where she's even saying like okie dokie before she like jumps him to fuck the shit out of him on a table.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's like, yeah,
It's pretty, they're really hammering it home.
the way the show
Uh,
treats sexuality in general is very strange and interesting, right? Because later we see her interactions with Maximus,
mhm.
where he has all this bizarre lingo for sex. We'll talk about that later. Um, so basically, her dad gets kidnapped. A bunch of their vault family are killed in this raid. They are gradually able to restore order, but they've got a bunch of prisoners they have to deal with now,
Yep.
and they don't really have experience with how that might work.
Right. And they're not interested in vengeance. They,
Right? No, they're
right.
interested in
They just kind of,
rehabilitation.
yeah, they just kind of take it on the chin and reshuffle, you know?
Yeah, and we've got a couple of fun. Her one of the characters who kind of becomes more prominent at the end is her brother,
Mhm.
right? Who's Moises Arias plays Norm, who's tiny. He's like this tiny,
Yeah.
it's this really small man.
I think he was in Hannah Montana.
Oh, really? I'm
Yeah, I believe so.
I'm not that Hannah Montana fluent. I haven't done the deep dive yet. Eventually, that iCarly. There's a few others I've been meaning to.
Sure, that you're not quite there yet. Yeah.
SpongeBob. I still don't know anything about SpongeBob. I think if I knew these, maybe I could relate to my students better, or perhaps maybe not. That would probably make
Right.
it even more cringe. Yeah, this is like in Hannah Montana when my students are like putting their earphones in. They're just like, get me out of here. Um, so the other by the end of the episode, Lucy sort of tricks the other vault members. Oh, there's also Zach Cherry. I love Zach Cherry. He's in I think he's in Her also as like one of the bookstore colleagues.
Mhm.
He's a great sort of character actor who's been appearing in a lot of streaming shows and other in films and stuff. Um, she tricked some of her colleagues into like going out into the world to like find on a quest to find her father, and that's sort of the guiding
Right, and
mission.
a bunch of the information that you get in the beginning makes it, pretty clear. It's not too telegraphed, but Maldivar has this moment where she's like, "You look just like your mother."
Oh yeah,
Right? There's a bit of like
so there's some
effective foreshadowing that sort of like leads you to realize that like this mission is obviously going to reveal far more than simply chasing down the father in this new world, right? And I mean, she's great. What do you think about Maldivar?
I think she's wonderful.
Yeah, she's in And Just Like That, right?
Oh really? No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, and it was so bad it just made me hate the show even more, realizing that this person's actually pretty good.
What is in Just Like That again? Remind me.
It's the Sex and the City reboot.
Oh yes, of course.
Truly one of the worst things ever created.
Another one of my blind spots. Forgive the ableist term. Yeah, Sarita Chowdhury is her name, and she's
Yeah.
great. She's great. She's very
Yeah.
compelling. And so, should we talk about Maximus? Maximus is the other
Sure.
kind of lead, played by Aaron Moten. He is in this, quite frankly, ridiculous
Yeah.
religious cult slash crusade. They're like a crusading order almost called the Brotherhood of Steel, and they wear these kind of the knights. The main guys wear these like mech armors, and
Right, that don't even feel that practical.
no,
And like
no.
it's like seems sometimes like it'd be way harder to fight in that thing than just to get out of it and duke it out. I don't know.
Yeah, and they can fly. They're pretty high tech, and they're kind of like the last vestige of like really potent technology in a world that is
Yeah,
otherwise pretty much like the Wild West, right?
that's right. Yep.
With except with mutant features, right?
Right, but the same sort of thing. Everything's being bartered. People are cowboys, and
There's this
bounty hunters
there's a
and
lawlessness to
yeah,
everything.
there's a certain lawlessness to everything. You're tearing out your teeth for to be able to fix your equipment and stuff like that.
Yeah, and they trade bottle caps. That's their currency,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, if that'll be 5 bottle caps, will you do it for 4? No. You know, it's like, um, Maximus is a aspiring squire in this order,
Hmm.
and it's one of his friends who, very interestingly, is a non-binary character in this
Yep.
show. I thought that was a good choice to have this like dystopian future that also has like gender diversity. You know?
Right. Right.
It's like, well, not everything has changed. You know, there's still some, you know, some vestiges of like
Right.
archetype.
Some of the future did move in our direction.
Yeah,
Uh, just not the TV screens and the fashion.
right, right. That took a weird U-turn back to time before our parents even. But yeah, the like basically Maximus, their friend hurts themselves, or at first it sort of, did Maximus do this? They cut their foot up,
Hmm.
so Maximus gets promoted to take their place as the squire to this knight who is played by beloved actor Michael Rappaport, Knight Titus.
Yeah, this was like people were getting like liked the show, and a lot of people on Twitter were like, man, they took it off, and it was Michael Rappaport. And I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me! But you know, they fucking got rid of him right away, so that's fine. But
Yeah,
that was really funny when that it was like, oh, and of course he's made himself, I guess, relevant is definitely not the right word, but notorious again with his
yeah. His
various political screeds that we don't have to get into in this
no, no.
particular
Let's
episode.
save that for our inevitable.
But he has really so that if you see his face in anything, you are repulsed.
Yeah, he looks awful, and he's perfect.
Yeah,
He's in a way, he's like perfect for this role.
yeah, that's right.
Because he takes off
That's
his
right.
mask and he's like, "You dumb fuck!" Like this, that, and he's basically like, he fights a mutant bear, and he's like haranguing Maximus for not like aiding him correctly or whatever, and he's like, get me that like med pack, and I'm gonna have you killed." And so sensibly, Maximus just like doesn't get it, and he dies. And he begins posing as Knight Titus, although he's not that fluid using the mech suit, right?
I mean, he's meant to be a protege
Yeah,
at first and learn, and he is thrust into this situation. But we also see these flashbacks of him as a kid,
right.
right?
And he survived some other
in
new.
this sort of nondescript, some sort of nondescript, confusing town that has existed in this timeline. We don't really know. We're made to not know exactly what's going on there. But he sort of is like the second main character, and then the third is. I mean, you want to talk a bit about Goggins, obviously, and how his story starts.
Yeah, and I mean he also like um he like he survives in a fridge, right? As a child,
Yeah.
a skull reference. Sorry, that
Mm-hmm.
I refer to Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as simply Skull.
Skull. Yeah.
Yeah, as one must if one is a true indie head. But in any case,
But
just
the pilot basically is setting up, right? Three people on journeys,
yep,
basically.
yep. And we've got Maximus who's learning the ways of being a knight and kind of failing. And then we've got Cooper in the past who's trying to figure out why this, like, what's going on with his wife and, like,
Mm-hmm.
this sort of looming nuclear war. And we also eventually meet Cooper in the future, right? Even though it's
Yes.
200 years later, he is still alive, but sadly, he has become
No nose.
a ghoul. Yeah, he is.
The saddest part of it, no nose.
Yeah.
Just to let us all know that he's been through some shit, you know?
Yeah, yeah. He is a ghoul. And a ghoul is like type of radiation slash drug induced living undead. And I think we understand it from the show that ghouls have certain advantages. They heal most injuries like almost immediately, but if they don't take a certain amount of drugs, they revert to a kind of zombie like chattering.
Right, and they can get reinfected by the radiation.
Yeah, and it's not good.
No, it looks pretty rough.
Yeah,
But he doesn't. He looks the least rough of the ghouls.
yeah, he's
right?
the ghoul
like
that's like kept it together best. He's a gunfighter.
Right.
He's become,
Yeah.
and
He still has swag despite this journey he's been on. You know.
yeah, and he's like he's become.
Well, it's just funny. It's just funny to like experience this and still be like cock of the walk. You know.
Yeah,
Like.
Yeah,
I'm sure it had to have been tough at some point in these 2 centuries for this man, but he's still just kind of like, he's got the pistol, he's got the gun, he's rolling around, he's got the sharp turns of phrase still. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
he's so fucking good.
Yeah, and the MacGuffin, however, for the whole first season is hilarious because we meet Dr. Siggy Vilzig, who's played by the brilliant Michael Emerson. You may recall him as greatest character of all time, Ben from Lost. Did you ever watch Lost?
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, we'll talk about Lost.
I love
eventually
Lost.
for sure.
I'm a Lost freak. I love Lost. Can't get enough of Lost.
I loved the early seasons.
I love
Lost.
all of it. No, I think season 5 is maybe my favorite season. The final season, the Sideways Universe Hour, is a little rough, but season 5 I love. Anyway, he's a great actor. He's been in a bunch of stuff. He's in that show Evil. I don't know if you've dipped your toes.
No, never seen it.
It's a network show. It's people like it. It seems terrible to me, but I've watched a few just because Michael Emerson is in it. And he's a scientist of some kind. He has a mutant dog that's like his companion, and he's trying to get to Moldaver, right? He wants to transmit something to her, and unfortunately, Michael Emerson's head is in every episode after the second one, but as a character, he's killed in a sort of showdown between the ghoul and eventually Maximus pretending to be Knight Titus, and the rest of the season is just these characters are all like after this head because
gotta get the head. Where's the head? Who's got the head?
Lucy wants to trade the head for her father's freedom. The ghoul. Why does the ghoul want the head? Maybe the ghoul doesn't really care as much about the head.
Isn't it just as like the bounty hunter of it all?
Oh yeah,
that's
right. That's right. And
because he uses Lucy as bait when they eventually come together.
Yeah.
Right.
To get the head back from the giant.
Yeah. This is what I like. This is. I mean, obviously the it's not too mysterious that obviously the head contains something important. But what I like about this show a lot is that they set this up early where there's these 3 people on their own sort of journeys, right?
Yeah.
And those things can develop sort of individually, but also when they all come together at various times. And it sort of facilitates this deeper dive into the intricacies of the world itself without becoming overly confusing and having to explain like this sect of people do this and their magic power is this. And you get like all of this information. And this way you're just kind of like along for the ride with these 3 different people. That's all revolving around essentially this one thing. And then all of the other information is typically coming in through different timelines. Right.
And it's not
the trips down to the vault, separated from these 3, hero or anti-hero journeys as it were.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Like, there are a few moments when we get kind of info dumps about the back, but not in a way that feels oppressive and annoying, right?
And not a ton with these 3 main characters. I mean, most info dumps are back at the vault with Lucy's brother starting to piece things together in an interesting way, and then obviously back in the past when
Cooper is like
Cooper is,
investigating the background of all of
that's right.
this.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, and I think like one of the things I really like about the show is, yeah, I mean exactly that. That like we're just kind of shown stuff, and some of it
Mhm.
is explained, some of it isn't explained. One of the dynamics that leads to this is the fact that it's a classic like fish out of water tale, in that Lucy is like insanely naive about the
Yeah.
like day-to-day realities of the world above the vaults, right?
Right.
Maximus much less so, but he's naive in some other ways because he's had a kind of sheltered existence with this brotherhood who like rescued
Yeah,
him.
he's not naive in the way that Lucy is, but he's naive in terms of navigating the world
And like human
itself.
relationships. He doesn't seem
Right.
to like really know how to.
Right. Well, he's part of a really weird, fucked up, like militant cult thing.
Yeah,
So yeah,
he was raised by like the Crusaders, like as they.
right. And like all these pockets, all these groups, all these little pockets. It's another thing that's fun is that they're all like pretty weird. I mean, again, like it doesn't belong in any sort of hyper realist reading. I don't think about would this happen in a
No,
nuclear
no,
scenario,
no,
but
no.
it is fun to see people end up either acting out by themselves in the case of the Ghoul, or in the case of the Vault Dwellers and the Brotherhood, in these like very fucking just weird, eccentric, goddamn ways of existing.
Yeah,
That kind of feels like it makes sense because the whole world now exists in a form of cabin fever that extends, to the people living not just in the vault, right? Because it does, you don't get the sense that this world is expansive or safe, of course, right? And so they're all kind of in this like fucked up cabin fever. Just some of them are in literal vaults, and others are in this highly contained, contaminated universe now, right?
yeah, and the one town they come back to a few times is called Philly, but it does not seem to be Philadelphia.
No, strange choice, but whatever.
Yeah, and
You can
it's
just call it whatever. But yeah,
yeah, it's an old west town. Maybe that's what's called in the video game or something.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
probably some deeper reason for that we were unaware of. And yeah, I mean, Moldaver is kind of worshipped by certain groups of people, right? She's referred
Mhm.
to as the Flame Mother.
Yeah, it's like everyone knows Moldaver. Everyone knows me. That.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so there's one episode when a bunch of the head changes hands several times. We meet fake Knight Titus, actually Maximus. Gets a new
Mhm.
squire, and it's this character Thaddeus,
Yeah,
who's quite good, played by Johnny Pemberton, and he's very funny, right? I mean, he like Maximus kind of slips into the kind of dominant like abusive relationship that he briefly experienced with his knight,
right.
and but you can kind of tell his heart isn't really in it, and like
Yeah, and it's like partially probably to keep the secret as
yeah,
long as he can, and all of that. Yeah.
exactly, it's the facade. And there's one episode, eventually he reveals himself, and Thaddeus is just like "F you," and just like
Yeah.
deactivates his armor, takes the head, and leaves. Um,
I have to say, I didn't see that.
you didn't see,
Figured that
you thought
I didn't think he would go so far as like fucking deactivating the guy and keeping him stuck in the fucking suit. Like, I could see taking the head and being like,
no, he fully screwed him. And eventually, there's one episode where they go into another vault where Maximus eventually teams up with Lucy, and
mhm.
they go into this other vault, and everyone in this vault is a freak. Like everyone
Yeah,
has different mutations. Their overseer is a cyclops. He just has one eye.
yeah, and like this is another good thing about this show is that like it feels like it works the way that things get weirder and as things get explained a little bit. It never really feels like they're shoving a bunch of shit down your throat, like in the way that we talked about with Three Body Problem. It right, like you start with this idea that like there's the vault dwellers. I mean, obviously there's got to be like more to the story, and there's probably a conspiracy and all that stuff. But like there seems to be something very natural about combining it with these journeys, like the way that you also get to find out. It doesn't quite like nothing quite shocked me in the show. It wasn't quite suspenseful because it does feel pretty obvious, like the directions that the show is going to take. But
Yeah.
it was definitely like fun when they get to the vault and it's like that, you know, it was like, oh, this is cool.
Oh, that woman's eyes are glowing. That guy's a
Yeah, I
cyclops.
didn't
Like,
really have any moments of the show where I was like, holy shit, you know, like
no, it's
it
not
didn't.
like a mystery box show, right?
That's right.
The show isn't built around suspense. I mean, you kind of get from the get go, just by virtue of the fact that there is this double timeline thing, that like
Yeah,
something that brought this world about is like effed up.
not as it
And
seems. Yeah.
yeah, and we're gonna learn what that is. And we basically do by the end of the first season. So maybe we should just talk about that because I think that is like the area that is perhaps most interesting from the perspective of
Hmm.
the podcast, which is that we come
Yeah.
to learn that Cooper in the older timeline is a sort of military hero who's turned Western style movie star, right?
Yeah.
And he's kind of malleable. He's not super principled. He doesn't have the kind of he has charisma, but he doesn't have any backbone really. And there's a scene when he's like, I don't think my character would shoot this guy like this. And
Yeah, that's great.
the directors are like, actually, don't you think that,
They're like, welcome to fucking America.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah. And he
the
just
ground is shifted. You're gonna shoot that motherfucker in the face.
yeah,
I love that part.
exactly. And he's just kind of like, oh, okay, right? He kind of just goes along with this. We come to learn that his wife, he starts doing ads for Vault Tech, who are promoting these big, complicated vaults that they've invented. And we see all the trappings that are familiar to us from the future, where people have the wrist, like Apple watches that are just like these giant metal, like almost gauntlets. They seem
Right. They also feel like they were made in the 1950s,
yeah.
but for a movie, like not even the technology. They were just made for like the movie
Plan
that
9
they were
from outer
making.
space or
Yeah,
whatever.
that's
Like
right. That's right.
some low budget sci-fi thing. Yeah, exactly. And those are everything looks great. Like the visual design of everything is great. We're never really it's never really explained to us why this future is this 1950s world. But I think like from the artistic perspective, like the creators of the show, are calling back to the era when Cold War nuclear panic was
Yeah.
highest, right?
Right.
But also, I
Right.
think the 1950s is the beginning of television mass culture in a way,
Hmm.
right? So this idea of like that's like what's happened after the nuclear disaster is like this is like the golden age. It's almost like there's like a nostalgia, like a desire to go back to a simpler time, back when we had three networks and everyone could be on the same
Right.
page about blah blah blah
Right.
blah, as opposed to now in the 2020s when it's chaos and we have 10 different alt-right rumble feeds we can watch if we want to just learn
Yeah.
about how Joe Biden is an alien or like
Right.
whatever the like whatever your flavor is you can find it. I mean
Yeah. I really like. I mean, not only does it like feel like, to put it really simplistically, like when you are in the past, it feels like you're further in the past, which is just kind of like a fun
yeah
way of like digesting the story itself. And
yeah
like
yeah
you do feel like, although it was obviously like decision made by the video game, that
yeah
from a perspective of a television show, just imagine all of the cutbacks being like to dudes like us in a time like this. It would just be a little boring. I think that like the contrast really does help maintain my interest when we do go back to, you know, the run up to 2077.
yeah no I think that's exactly right. And gradually other actors kind of start to shun Cooper because he's working for Vault-Tec.
Mm-hmm.
His wife is an executive at Vault-Tec, but she's not being fully honest with him. Eventually, he kind of starts to eavesdrop on her interactions with her colleagues, and the big reveal is he overhears them basically saying like, "Look, the only way like we can really Like to maintain the sort of infinite growth potential of
Yeah.
Vault-Tec is to
Yeah.
just cause a nuclear war. Like
Yeah. How are we gonna keep moving this product?
yeah,
It's amazing.
which I think is like, I mean, it's great, but it's also somewhat of a faulty premise, right? Like, and because the whole ethos of like Vault-Tec is like the future of human civilization is like management,
Yep.
and like we come to learn that like the head of Vault-Tec has essentially he's become a robot. Like his brain is in a vat, and
Right.
he's controlling a relatively primitive like wheeled robot. And the scenes eventually, the brother Norm breaks into the Vault 31, which is like this off limits place, and he meets this robot, and the robot's like, "Stand still, I need to prick you with this poison," and he just like
Mm-hmm.
easily it's a very delightful interaction. And
Yeah.
what we come to learn is that the people that run the vault that Lucy is from were all the executives and the executive training members. And we even see that her dad, Kyle MacLachlan, Hank, is from the same. We see him meeting Cooper back in the time before Cooper, became a
And that I think, if I'm correct, is that these volts won out, right? Because wasn't it that there were going to be hundreds of them? Like, isn't that part of the whole?
Well,
Each
there presumably are, but each vault is the vaults that they're in are like the Normcore vaults because they're the vaults that
right.
were made for the executives. Whereas all the other vaults have some kind of diabolical experiment going on inside of them.
But they say like one of the goals that each vault should also try to like figure out how they think the world should look, right?
Right,
And sort of like the idea of competition still exists, which is so funny. The idea of like who's going to rise to the top with the best idea of how to make the society work again.
Right, because the premise
top.
is that like the vaults are going to be the ones to reestablish civilization.
That's right.
After the half-life has
through a breed of super managers, which is I think it's so funny that like the sci-fi is talking about like HR departments and R&D. I love that part.
No, it's great. It's a really, as you say, it's not like a huge surprise, but it's pleasantly well managed, to use the terminology of the show.
And it's not like you said about the self-seriousness, like it's never put forward as this like great or grave philosophical situation, right? It's all like very banal in a way.
It's like, an evil company like caused the end of the world because they wanted to like dominate what was left, like rule over
and get really good at management. Just get really good at management for everything that's to come, because there is that like the buds, right? Buds.
Yeah.
Where it's like he's like, we got to start thinking way longer term. So we got to like be able to stick to you. You can say your mind projects take centuries. Like as like the ability, it's such an amazing statement on capitalism, right? Of like, man, if we can finally figure out a way to live for hundreds of years, we can do some like big projects at work. Like we'll still be at work and like, but man, like we can make a whiteboard even bigger and have even more like even bigger mind maps of like where this is going to go, how exciting it would be to like come together with a team on a project, like as though that's what we would really want to use our newfound life extension for.
Right. So it's like they cause a nuclear holocaust, but they don't do so for like reasons of like racism or like
religion, spirituality.
There's none of that. Their ideology is just management.
Or even to like, and this is one of the good things I think about not grounding it in the near past or near future that so many shows now are, which is like everything is about the looming ecological collapse and scarcity, and that's why we're doing all of this. And it's time to go underground.
There is some of that. I mean, like the reason the tensions with China are higher are because of resources.
It's a resource war, right? But like still, the thrust of like what's going to like save them is this management culture. Right.
Yeah. It's quite funny, and it's funny that the show is on Amazon, which is like one of the most hegemonic corporate, and we hear constantly about the various problems with Amazon's work culture and the unfair, like you can't take a bathroom break, you can take one,
Right.
like just like
Yeah.
that
I mean,
that
and I
it
also
is
find
like a
it,
micromanaged company in and of itself, right?
it also feels different that like through this sort of like corporate propaganda, right? In terms of like what I'm trying to say about the climate stuff, environments, is that like there's a degree of optimism that like exists about their ability to overcome and problem
That
solve,
there's like
which is really
that
funny to me.
there's an optimism like in there, like yeah.
Yeah, it's not just like the two characters from Last of Us. It's like everyone dies, everything's going to be bad forever.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, there's something kind of like, I mean, I'm sure highly delusional, as we will come to find out in later seasons. But like the idea of the power of business to like shape that sort of optimism to the people who like dwell in these vaults is extremely, extremely funny.
no, I agree. I think it's like it's a really smart in that way, and that it doesn't. Yeah, because it could be so easy for this to be just like a grim, dark
Yeah,
post-apocalypse show, but it's not.
right. Yeah,
And
it's really not.
and then I love the John Daly character, the like chicken fucker, I believe he's called. Like one of the early moments when there's two guys in conflict. One is, and Lucy like rescues this one guy, right? And he runs
Hmm.
off, and she's like, "Thank you, ma'am," or something. And he's like, "That guy, I caught that guy fucking my chickens," or whatever. That guy eventually meets up with Thaddeus, right? Who has been
Yep.
horribly injured, right? He has a mangled foot. And the guy's like, "Oh, I have a potion that'll cure you," right? And he gives it to Thaddeus. Thaddeus, his foot heals. It's a miracle. But
Hmm.
he seems so, again, like a different kind of naivete. He's like Maximus. He's grown up in this like night cult. Um, but he's a ghoul. Like he has become a ghoul, and now he's
Yeah.
like sort of and the way it's handled, it's like this grim fate, but it's hilarious, right? Later he gets shot in the neck with a booby trap, and he's like, "Why am I not dead?" And then they're like, "I think Thaddeus, I think you've become a ghoul." And he's like,
Yeah.
"No,
Yeah. You might
no."
you might want to sit down for this. But yeah, I mean the way that these characters are and so important to the story really does separate it from some of these other things where
Yeah,
so many characters now are the jaded ones. They've seen it all, whether it's like
which we have with
Pascal in
we
Last
have.
of Us. Even the kid in Last of Us has like seen plenty and
Oh
has like,
God, yeah, her best friend turned
right.
into a zombie, and she had to murder her. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right. It's not like she's like going out there like, oh, maybe I can share my water with this random guy. He won't take all of the water, right? Oh no, he's taking all of my water, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, I think like ultimately comedy, and maybe I've talked about this before, but like when I was growing up, I always thought like tragedy was just like the highest form of art, right? Just like,
Well,
oh,
there's this tendency when you're younger that anything profound must be dark,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Or just
Right.
like Shakespeare, like, oh, like King Lear, Hamlet, like
Yeah,
King
that's right.
Lear. King Lear is so dark, it's the best. And then
Right.
like Hamlet is so dark, everyone dies, blah blah blah. But like I think
Sure.
the reason Hamlet remains like incredibly high in my estimation, and King
Is
Lear,
he's like the funniest guy ever.
yeah, because Hamlet is hilarious. Because he's like
Yes, of
he's
course.
just a total clown, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, I know, I'll make a play that will like get my uncle to review. It's like Hamlet. This is the worst plan I've ever
Right.
heard.
Right.
What are you doing? And like, so I'm not saying that this show is like the equivalent of Hamlet or anything ridiculous, but
No,
that
but
the
it's the use of the levity, right? It's the use
helps
of
to
like,
elevate it in a way that is refreshing and enjoyable for this material that we cover that we've been covering and will
right. And I think
continue to
we've
cover.
we've talked about this. We've talked about this a couple times where it's like there are some shows, and I think this came up in the leftovers. And I know we haven't done Severance, but this how I felt was that the in the era of binge watching versus week to week, which I did with this. This had already ended. I watched the whole thing,
Yeah.
and the experience I did that with Severance and the rewatch of Leftovers, like holy shit! Like I'm just getting like beaten down. It becomes kind of hard to enjoy it because it's just like so bleak, right?
Yeah.
And this is one that I think you can actually do.
Yeah, because it's fun.
In this new way, because it's just like it's a bit fun. Not that you like really don't care about anyone. Like I certainly like care about what's happening to Lucy and Maximus and the Ghoul in their own ways. But like when you're watching a show like Severance over the course of a weekend binge, it's like, wow, yeah, it's good, but like, fuck, man, this is just like a lot. I'm now sad when I turn off the show too. You know?
Yeah, that's
It's nice though because we don't plan this, and we do actually like the show.
Yeah.
And we've been on such a run that people might listen to us and turn off an episode and be sad too, and it's nice to like.
Well, I think even for stuff we hate, I think we bring a certain esprit de corps, if you will.
That's right.
Joie de vivre, you know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's.
But I don't know. I mean, I'm watching I watched the end of this, right?
Yeah.
If you want to just sum up what happens.
Well, basically, Lucy discovers her dad is a part of this evil cabal of people from the past, and all the ideals he's imparted on her, he's done, hypocritically. She shoots him, not fatally, but to save Maximus. He ends up saying F it and just flies off, right? Her mother has been made into a ghoul and is dead. She kills her mother, right? Who's been living with Moldaver as a ghoul. Seems to be a mercy. And Maximus becomes the kind of leader of this brotherhood along with the
it's sort of a King of the North moment.
Yeah, there's a real exactly. That's a good analogy. Real Jon Snow energy. He and Lucy are separated because Maximus and his gang end up taking over this sort of Moldaver's castle or fort or whatever, where they've reinstituted cold fusion, which has started up the lights in this place off in the distance, which I think from what I've read is New Vegas, right? Which is like one of the settings of one of the follow-up Fallout games. Lucy, it seems like, has teamed up with the Ghoul. Her brother, back in the vault, has also learned of the conspiracy, as I mentioned. He meets the robot brain guy and has learned that his dad and several of the other elders of their group have come out of these hibernation, suspended animation tubes. So the show's really set up for a great second season. Just kind of a bunch of mysteries were resolved in this one, but there's obviously much more to learn about this demented world.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the pilot of this made it kind of clear the direction that this was going to go in terms of educating everybody about the world and the people. And now I'm pretty excited for the second season because I feel like I don't really have the same sense about what will unfold over the next run, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
this one we were obviously going to need certain information, and those big reveals would come at the end of this. And now it's like I kind of like the way that just like the dad gets to the city, right?
Yeah,
and it kind of just like it's kind of fitting. It's like it feels way more open ended now in terms of what's going to happen.
Right, which could be dangerous. I mean, I think with Westworld...
It could get really bad really quick.
Yeah, with Westworld, that was kind of the scenario, right? At the end of the first season, with this big mystery was resolved about the founder and the guy was a robot, was an android or whatever. And then the second season seemed to be really... spinning its wheels.
Unsure of itself?
Spinning its wheels a lot, and then trying to...
Ironically, Westworld was spinning its wheels. What a stunning turn of events.
Yeah, and maybe that'll happen with this. I hope not. I don't think so. I think the writing in this is a little lighter. It's a little less... Westworld's good, but it's a little self-serious in the way we've been discussing, right?
Well, that's the thing that's cool about this is, like, I don't think this show suffers from the desire to be a great show, if that makes sense.
No, exactly.
But at the same time, doesn't seem to be willing to bottom out and be like a total send up and pointless. And it's a very interesting thing in terms of like not trying to reach for prestige television, like Last of Us style gravity, but at the same time, like I don't get this sense that this show will ever be great, and I don't know if it cares to, but I'm just hoping that it could always be pretty good.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and that should be enough a lot of times.
I think so.
You know,
I have high hopes that will be dashed, but never mind. All right, so I think that's good for Fallout. What are we talking about next week?
Well, next week we're gonna go back into the world of AI. Correct?
That's right.
With a movie that I have not watched in a very long time.
Yeah.
Remembered not loving it. Her.
Yeah.
Is
Spike
the movie
Jonze,
starring Phoenix.
Joaquin Phoenix as
the
protagonist, Scarlett Johansson as his robot girlfriend. Well, his Siri-style girlfriend, right?
Right. It's a bit of I'm hoping it's a bit of a Phoenix cleanser, because I did recently watch Napoleon, which was a fucking train wreck. And so I'm looking forward to having Phoenix reclaim my love for him.
Don't get me started about Ridley Scott's Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte, interesting enough. Don't have any beef with him, you know. I mean, aside from, you know, his many crimes. But
yes, that's right.
He's not one of those overrated people that I hate.
It does feel like it was really hard to make Napoleon's life as uninteresting as he was able to make it in that movie. A feat unto itself, really.
Well, Ridley Scott is a true blue Brit. He's a real Brit, straight from the streets of Sussex. He is.
Right.
Yeah. So Her, I haven't seen it in a long time either. I'll be curious to see how we compare it to Ex Machina. Which we were both a little sour on. I think it's a little lighter. Should be a little bit more.
I mean, even just my sense from before was that I didn't love it, but it definitely was better than Ex Machina.
I guess we'll find out. So until then, remember to follow the pod. Tell a friend if you like the show. Follow us on Instagram at End of the World WMS. And until then, this has been the End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I am Michael.
And I am Stu. And we will see you next time.